Was the kind of day that seemed to sink into your bones. Gray skies, heavy clouds, and a fine mist of rain that clung to the air like unspoken thoughts. Harvard's historic brick buildings stood proud against the gloom, their ivy-covered walls whispering centuries of academic triumphs. Inside Emerson Hall, a large lecture room buzzed with the low hum of conversation. In the far back corner, a young man sat alone, his hands wrapped around a battered notebook. 19-year-old Daniel Reyes was not the kind of student most people noticed. His hoodie was faded, the elbows frayed, and the soles of his sneakers threatened to peel away. But what he lacked in appearance, he made up for with the quiet intensity in his dark brown eyes, the kind of gaze that didn't just look at things, but saw through them. Daniel had fought for every inch of his place at Harvard. Born in a cramped apartment above a bodega in a working-class neighborhood, he had grown up with the constant soundtrack of sirens, muffled arguments through thin walls, and the mechanical hiss of his father's tire repair shop downstairs. His parents, immigrants from the Philippines, had given up their own dreams so he might have one. His mother cleaned offices at night, coming home with aching feet and a soft smile she reserved only for him. His father's hands were always stained with grease, his shoulders bent from years of labor. For Daniel, every page of math, every formula, was a step away from that life. Not because he was ashamed of it, but because he wanted to repay the sacrifices that had carried him here. At the front of the lecture hall, Professor Charles Whitman was erasing yesterday's notes from the blackboard. He was a man who carried himself with the assurance of someone who had long ago conquered the intellectual world. His suits were pressed, his tie perfectly knotted, and his sharp gray eyes missed nothing. For 30 years, he had been the star of Harvard's mathematics department, part genius, part gatekeeper, part storm cloud. Whitman had a reputation. He didn't just teach, he tested souls. Students feared him not because he was cruel, but because his standards were so impossibly high. He had a habit of posing questions not found in any textbook, questions that existed on the edge of the impossible. Today, however, he was about to go further than ever. The room quieted as he turned to the board and began writing. The chalk squeaked against the surface, each stroke adding to an increasingly intricate equation that sprawled across the blackboard like an ancient, undecipherable map. When he finally stepped back, the board was nearly full. Symbols intertwined with mathematical notations in a dense network that made even the best students squint. This, Whitman announced, turning to face the class, is not a problem from your syllabus. It is not a problem from your textbook. In fact, he allowed a small, amused smile to play at his lips, it is not a problem anyone here can solve. A few chuckles rippled through the room. This equation, he continued, is a special case of a problem that has stumped some of the world's greatest mathematical minds for over 70 years. Nobel laureates have tried. Fields Medal winners have tried. Entire research teams have published failed attempts. It is, for all practical purposes, impossible. He let the word linger, enjoying the weight it carried. Then, his eyes scanned the room like a hawk searching for prey. They landed on the back corner. Mr. Reyes, he said suddenly, his voice carrying an edge that made several students turn. Daniel froze. Yes, sir. Why don't you come down and give it a try? A murmur went through the room. Everyone knew what this was. Whitman's challenge wasn't an invitation, it was a public test. Daniel could already feel the unspoken judgments. A poor kid from a no-name high school. Against this problem. It was almost cruel. Still, Daniel rose, slinging his old backpack off his shoulder. He walked down the aisle, feeling the weight of every gaze on him. The chalk felt foreign in his hand, dry and brittle. For a long moment, he simply stared at the problem. The rain outside tapped against the tall windows in a steady rhythm. He could hear the faint sound of a girl 2 rows up clicking her pen impatiently. Daniel began writing. Slowly at first. Small adjustments, rephrasing the question in his mind, breaking the forest of complexity into smaller, more navigable paths. He remembered the words of his high school math mentor, Mr. Alvarez. Math isn't about attacking the wall head on. It's about finding the hidden door. Minutes passed. Then 20. Then 40. Whitman leaned against his desk, watching but saying nothing. Most of the students had given up paying attention, assuming the outcome was inevitable. Daniel erased entire sections, rewrote them, then shifted approaches entirely. His brow furrowed, his lips pressed in concentration. And then, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, but in Daniel's mind, a pattern emerged like a constellation appearing in a cloudy sky. The equation wasn't just numbers and variables, it was telling a story, and he had finally found the first sentence. His movements became faster, more confident. Lines connected in unexpected ways. Simplifications emerged that revealed hidden symmetry. The impossible problem began to yield. Whitman's smirk faded. He straightened, stepping closer to the board, his eyes narrowing. Finally, after nearly an hour, Daniel set the chalk down. The board was full from edge to edge with a chain of reasoning so elegant it looked as though it had always been meant to exist. This, Daniel said softly, almost to himself, is the solution. The key wasn't attacking the problem as it was given, it was reframing it entirely. Once you change the perspective, the path becomes clear. A heavy silence filled the room. Whitman approached the board, scanning every line. He read it once, then again, then a third time, each pass slower than the last. His hands trembled slightly as he reached the final line. Impossible, he murmured, not in disbelief anymore, but in awe. Because Daniel Reyes had just done something no one else in the world had achieved. He had cracked an unsolved problem that had haunted the brightest minds for generations. Daniel, standing there with chalk dust on his fingers and rainwater still dripping from his hair, had no idea yet, but the answer he had just written would echo far beyond the walls of that lecture hall. It would change his life. And it would change history.